Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and that book is available as a paperback, an audiobook, and the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. For more information on that, as well as the two sequels for which you'd pay cash money, head to middlegradeninja.com. You can also find out some more information about my work for older readers under the name Robert Kent. It's a very secret pen name. No one could ever decipher that impossible clue. And more important even than that, you can get interviews with thousands of editors, authors, literary agents, the entire back catalog of the show. Everything that is good in this world is available at middlegradeninja.com. So visit that, and by God, let's start the show. I couldn't be more excited. We're talking with Aura Lewis today. Aura, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Rob?
I am thrilled to chat with you because I've got all kinds of questions, and you've done some interesting things with your career that hopefully we'll be able to talk about, plus your new book. So I don't summarize other people's biographies or other people's books because I just make a mess of both. And how painful for you to sit here listening to me butchering it when you're right there and you could do a better job. So probably the best place to start is if you would give esteemed audience kind of an overview of your background, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. So I'm an author and illustrator, and I make books for kids of different ages. So from picture books, some middle grade, and I also have one book for adults. I am originally from Jerusalem in Israel, so I grew up there. And I moved to the States for grad school with my husband. And yeah, I've been full-time author-illustrator for about the past 5 years or so. That is the short version.
There is a lot to unpack, and I'm going to do my best to try and get to a little bit of everything. We're certainly going to talk about Spectacular Sisters, which is available November 9th. So as esteemed audience is listening to this, I believe it should already be available. You can be picking up your copy right now. I had read that I want to talk about the work that you're doing as an artist, but I'm always curious about the journey to becoming an artist. Because I know that you've got an MFA from the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
But then I'd also read that after you graduated college, you had done some stints in architecture, psychology, graphic design, a little bit of everything. So when was it that you were able to find your way toward being the artist that you are now?
Let's see. So as as a child and growing up, I always was drawing, painting, making art, making like little books. As a kid, I was just always like making up stories. And so it was something that I've always loved to do, but I think, I had many interests. Like I just loved all kinds of things. And I was kind of encouraged to go study other things as well. I think like a lot of creative kids, are told like, oh, that's great. You can sort of do that as a passion or on the side. Why don't you go explore other things as well? So my undergrad, I actually did start studying architecture, but I realized pretty quickly that it was not for me. And then my undergrad is in psychology, and I did a lot of just like humanities and languages, Japanese, all kinds of things like that. And I actually thought for a while I was going to become a therapist. But I just realized that after some time doing that, I just really need to do something creative. That was just in me and calling me. So I studied graphic design. This is so when I moved to New York, I went to study graphic design because that was sort of an easy way to get back into the creative fields for me, like to just, start working. I thought, okay, that's like a profession that I can do. Um, so I pivoted, from psychology. I got an associate's degree in graphic design from Parsons, the New School of Design, and I worked as a designer for about 5 to 7 years. I don't even remember. And I actually still do some design. And I am so happy that I studied that because it really, really helped me. And it helps me now when I make books, like there's a lot of design involved. Also, like I'm involved in designing like both the interior and covers of my book. So yeah, so that was like really great. But working as a designer, I actually worked briefly at a publishing house, which was a really interesting experience. And I think there really I started feeling like I want to be the content creator myself. So as much as I love designing other people's books, I was like, I want to do this. I think um I can make a book too. I remember as a kid looking at picture books and feeling as a child like I can do this one day. I think that somewhere along the way I lost my confidence, and especially since I haven't been doing it professionally, um it seemed very it seemed kind of this like huge goal. And I mean it still is like every book is like a huge undertaking, but um yeah, so working at the publishing house, I realized that I really want to be doing the content. And so it took some time, but I built a portfolio. And for me, I sort of really felt like it would be very helpful to do an MFA in illustration to sort of really get into that field and turn it into a full-time profession. Um, and yeah, and so that's what I did. I got into the MFA in New York, um and yeah, and I've been doing it since. And so I pivoted again from being a full-time graphic designer to being a full-time author and illustrator. So I hope that answered your quick question.
It does, but it also raises about three more.
Great.
Because one thing we should clarify, just for my own edification and for folks listening that might be wondering the same thing, what's the difference between a book designer and then an actual content creator? Because I would feel like if you're designing, you're having some input. Where does the line come down where you can't cross when you're the designer versus now when it looks like you did almost everything on the sisters.
Well, so okay, so the way it works, that's a fantastic question. And it's actually, yeah, it's really good to draw the line. So when you work as a book designer, publishing houses have art directors, designers, graphic designers. What they do is essentially put your whole book together. So usually what happens, not usually, but in many, many cases, an editor will acquire a manuscript. Let's say we're doing a picture book. So they would acquire a manuscript from an author, and then they would hire an illustrator to illustrate the book. And if it's a middle grade, because this is a middle grade podcast, they might hire an illustrator to create the cover and sometimes maybe some spot illustrations inside the book. And then all of that's what I'm calling the content. And so all of that will come into the publisher. The editor, will edit, they'll put it all together, but then the designer ultimately will put all of that together to create the final book that you are holding. Now, there's actually a lot of people involved, obviously, making the book. So, but the designer will lay it out. They'll put all the type together. They'll put all the, set all of the text in place, but also sometimes help the illustrator think of like what the cover will look like. They'll put the title on the cover. And then once they design everything, that will go to production. And then, you know, production handles like the actual printing. So that's not the designer. So that's just quickly like an overview of what it would look like. So as a designer, I was getting manuscripts, and I was working with illustrators, and then I would just sort of, you know, start from scratch, open a blank file and place the words. I would, you know, choose the fonts. You know, children's books have, you know, particular fonts, but it also really depends on like the mood and tone of the specific book. You know, is it a funny book? Is it a more like sensitive book? You know, what is, you know, what's the story being told? Like that all informs like the kind of colors and fonts and layout that I'm going to use. But I was getting illustrations from other illustrators, and I was getting words from other authors, and I was putting them together into a beautiful package. But none of it, you know, my name was in sort of like inside, like if you open a book, you might see in the back cover or inside flap or in the credits, it would say book designed by, right? But your name is not on the cover. You're not the creator of the book per se. And so I really wanted to, you know, and I'm on the computer all the time, right? The designer is like, it's all done on the computer. And I really wanted to make the illustrations myself. I really wanted to write the words myself too. And so that was the big change, I think, that that went from being a graphic designer to being an illustrator and an author. So and of course you could be all those things. So now when I make books, I am not there is always a designer or an art director that I work with at the publisher, because, you know, that's a lot to design the whole book, and that's not my title. But because I have this background in design, and it's very important to me what my final book looks like, because I'm, you know, a visual person, I'm an illustrator and designer, I always like have a lot of input. And I hope I don't make my designer's life too hard, because I'm like, oh, you know, I want the font to look a certain way. And, you know, when I submit my work, a lot of times there's some design in it. So that informs a lot of like the tone that I want the publisher to take. But yeah, but ultimately it is a collaboration. And I do need to hand over some of that control to the designers and the art directors that I work with, because I respect that they have some, you know, the publisher always has some their ideas about what their books need to look like, or if it needs to fit into a certain like collection that they have, or what marketing wants, or certain colors that they want to use. So yeah, it is a collaboration ultimately.
Well, obviously, you're far enough along in your career that when you speak, the room quiets and everyone listens, and we're okay. We're going to do it. But I was just thinking, actually, we were talking about somebody designs and illustrates the cover, and then somebody creates the cover, and then some other joker comes in to design the actual font that's going to go over it. That right away, I can imagine, creates loggerheads occasionally. And I'm sure you somewhere in there had disagreements about something you've been working on. How have you learned to embrace and accept some suggestions that maybe are more demands than suggestions at times, while keeping a cool head and still being happy with the satisfied product at the end? The final product, being satisfied with the final product?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I have definitely had, you know, issues where like I'll get the cover back and I'm like, what is this? I'm like really not happy with it. And yeah, it's a negotiation, you know, again, because my name is on the cover of the book and it's my project, and like I care deeply about what it's going to look like ultimately. I open a conversation, you know, I just, you know, I try to state as gently and as diplomatically as possible to say like, hey, you know, this is this is looking great, but I have some issues with X, Y, and Z. Do you think it's possible? Oh, and here are some suggestions of mine. I've had a couple of times where my agent had to sort of, intervene as well. In the end, I'm always happy with the results, and the publishers as well. Like, you never want to get to a situation where like the editor and publisher are like not happy, but the editors and publishers also really want their authors to be happy. So finding in the end like a balance is really important. And so sometimes like we go through a few rounds of revisions, but I've learned that it's always better to speak up and say what you want, because sometimes they just genuinely don't know and they do care. So yeah, and it's because I'm the artist as well. If I think because I'm the artist as well, they understand that I have a strong visual vision for my book. And so they want to hear it. But a lot of times also, if I work with a great designer, it's also really exciting to see what they can bring to the table and like how they can like sometimes make it stronger. So and I think that definitely was the case with like my more adult book is called The Illustrated Feminist, and that came out last year, and that cover was definitely a collaboration with the publisher, and I think that ultimately it was the right direction to go, even though it wasn't necessarily like what I first thought it would be, but I'm ultimately happy with that. And with sisters too, they really, it was definitely a collaboration, and I think the result is I'm really happy with it. But yeah, we definitely went through several rounds of iterations until we reached the final hard back cover that you will see available soon. And it's already available for pre-order if this is, but yeah, in November it will be out.
With the magic of time travel, you and I are talking now, but esteemed audiences listening to this, if the schedule holds, and it does, but if it does, then they're listening to it, I think, about the week after the book has released. So they should be able to hop on whatever their favorite bookseller is right now and order their copy as they're listening to the talk.
Awesome.
So something you'd said earlier I wanted to circle back to is you were working for a book publisher doing book design. You're actively learning every aspect of publishing, I assume, while you're there, and yet you still feel that it's necessary to go and get an MFA in illustration, which I love. But I'm curious, what does an MFA program offer that you can't learn while you're right there in the field getting your hands dirty?
Great question. So as a graphic designer, graphic designers, some are illustrators, but many are not. Really, their expertise is putting, designing text and layouts and bringing together different things and designing it as a layout. So you're not necessarily an illustrator. And to illustrate and like to draw and illustrate is a whole different not like expertise and ability. Now I did have a lot of background in drawing and painting, so I knew I could draw, but I never really learned how to draw for kids. Like I used to do a lot of like fine art, like painting, oil painting. I mean, it's something that you can definitely like teach yourself. And I was drawing for kids, but I kind of felt that I wanted to take my work to the next level. And I knew that the field of illustrating for children's book is extremely competitive, which it is. And that in order for me to really get into the field, and I also was interested in other illustration too. So I also illustrate, for editorial work or ad campaigns. So I do other kinds of illustrations as well. So I felt that in order to really step up my game, I would benefit from an MFA. I think I always wanted to do an MFA, and so an MFA in illustration was the perfect fit for me. By no means do I think that everyone needs to do it. I know that it's also like a very big financial commitment. I took a loan, I'm still paying it back. But for me, it was so worth it because it just sort of really helped me, first of all, embody being an illustrator. I think before that, it was very scary for me to say I'm an artist, I'm an illustrator, that sort of title, and sort of to become it. Like the MFA is a 2-year program where all you do is like live, breathe, eat illustration. Like all day you're thinking about it, you're working things out, you're meeting other illustrators who are doing the same thing. You have some, guidance from professors, you're working on projects, and you're able to sort of put other commitments aside. And so for me, that was like an invaluable experience, like that kind of saying, like doing that mental mind shift of like, now I'm an illustrator. This is what I do, and really learn it. And so, and just being introduced into that field, which I really didn't know anything about professionally. So yes, I knew some of the publishing side, but again, I wasn't the illustrator at the publisher. I saw how they worked with illustrators, but I was just like, how can I be on that other side of things? And just because you work at a publisher, like, doesn't mean you'll be published yourself, right? Like many editors and publishers are not actually published creators themselves, right? So they are the bookmakers, so to speak. Yeah, so for me, the MFA really helped me enter the field as a professional.
So when one more question about becoming an artist, and then by God, we're going to talk about the book, and we're going to break down some of the process, some of the work that went into that as well. But I'm curious, when did you feel that I don't need to keep looking for a day job? I don't need to know that I can fall back on being a therapist or whatever you might do if you weren't illustrating and designing. When did you have that moment of, okay, I really can't do this for a living. I can let go and embrace this now?
Wow. So I don't know if it was one moment. I feel like being a freelancer or sort of an independent artist always has, its moments of uncertainty. And I still feel that a lot. I thankfully have a husband who has a steady full-time job, and that is not, he knows when his next paycheck will arrive. Whereas I have been an independent because after, as a graphic designer, I also worked freelancer for a while. So I was able to sort of do that on my own for the past 7 or 8 years. But it's always, it's sometimes I feel like, oh, I feel very sure, but sometimes it's like I'm hustling, and sometimes it's like, oh, when will I have another book? Will I have another project? So I still sometimes feel like it's an evolving thing, and maybe, and sometimes I do, sometimes I take on extra graphic design work, but I'm always looking for new projects, always looking for new things. So yeah, no one ever promises you, it's not like a guaranteed job, right? There's no, like, I don't get like my monthly paycheck. So it really is, until this day, like project by project, client by client.
You don't read
But I do have an agent, so that, that's always helpful. So yeah.
I think I had this fantasy at one point, and I think a lot of artists do, that you reach the top of the artist mountain and there's, Leonardo da Vinci, and he says, you made it. Here's your guaranteed salary for life. Here are your benefits. You're going to be fine. here's wealth and fortune.
Absolutely. I mean, I wish, and I wish that for all artists to just, get to that stage. I think that some people, there's absolutely some, superstars that I think their work is guaranteed for life. Certainly Caldecott winners for picture books, or people who win Newbery Awards or things like that. I think that it's more certain for them, for sure. But yeah, I think just being an artist is it's I knew it going in, and I choose it every day. It's not easy. And I feel very, very lucky that I can be doing this as I do.
And even now, as I'm talking to you, you've got your book that's releasing. You've just done the credit sequence for Mrs. America on Hulu, right? This is where.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that was very exciting.
That's a huge high-profile deal. I saw you did a number of high-profile ad campaigns. So even now, you're still feeling like nobody could all go away tomorrow, or is it maybe a little bit more relaxed? It would take 3 months to all go away, or
I think that it's just there's just some days where I feel like I got this, like I've have a bunch of books out, I have a few things in the pipeline, like it will be okay. But then there's other days where it's just really scary, like I get rejected too, and I send things out that don't work out, and it's a very, very competitive field. Publishing is also like one of those like really slow things, and really, sometimes I go to a bookstore, and which I love, and I look at the children's section, and it's unbelievable to me how many new books there are, and how they're all being made. So, on the one hand, it could be very, very like exciting, but it could also be discouraging. And so it's kind of both. It's like, wait, how can I get another book out? But there are so many books, so maybe another one can come out. Also, it's very it really has to do with trends. And we see like there'll be like a big trend in like nonfiction, and then a trend in sciencey stuff, and then a trend in this and a trend in that. So you never know, like, are you still going to be relevant 5 years from now? Like, you want to think yes, but maybe not. And you constantly have to evolve, right? So like, sometimes I look at my work from 2 years ago, and I am like, oh, like I mean, maybe from the outsider, someone will say, oh yeah, it's definitely like it all looks the same. But, I want to think that I'm, evolving and getting better and improving. And sort of sometimes you have to like modify your work or make it like fit to the current moment. And there's always like new artists going on. So anyways, all this to say is that I absolutely do not feel like I can rest on my laurels and like, oh, this is guaranteed for life. Not at all. I feel like I constantly have to like get myself out there, get more work, get more visibility. How can I get my books to more readers? And how can I constantly grow and improve and get better? For sure, for sure. As an illustrator, as an author, as an artist, yeah.
I had read that you have a rule that you draw at least one picture every day. Is that right?
I definitely try to. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a rule, but yes, I definitely create something every day. If it's either write or draw every single day. Yes.
And we're talking about your birthday, the 4th of July, whatever you're Well,
if I'm like on a transatlantic flight which hasn't happened for a while, and with my 3 kids, and like, I don't know, I'm in a car and, sometimes not, but I like, it usually happens that, like, even if it's just like a few lines, like I write in my phone. And so it's very easy for me to pull out my phone and I'm like, oh, I have an idea, and I'll just put it down. Or, draw at night or something like that. So, yeah, I do try to do it every day. And then of course there's some days like I don't, but that's okay.
And I find I'm going to project onto you a little bit because this is something I do. Every book that I'm working on is simultaneously my greatest failure. Why was I even thinking of taking this project on? But also the greatest thing I've ever written, and possibly the greatest book humanity will ever have read when it's finished. Do you evaluate as well? And do you feel a renewed confidence in yourself as an artist and unbelievable highs followed by some lows, or have you managed to keep it a little bit more even keel?
Absolutely. Absolutely highs and lows and like all the time. And I constantly have to remind myself that it's okay. Like it's waves. Like I'll be feeling really low one day or really high another. And I'll say, okay, it's all temporary. And this is just part of the creative process. I think this is something that took me a while to also really embrace, because there'll be hard days and days where I feel like everything I do is just bad and like no one's gonna ever want to like acquire it or look at it, or and I have to remind myself that it's just part of the deal. And if there's something really hard, like that, like working through something, and in order to like create something great in the end. Like it's not all like, all the time rainbows and sunshine and unicorns. Like there's days where it's just feels really, really painful. And then just some days where maybe you just don't even have energy to do things. Like you said, it's a rule. Like there's some times where I'm maybe not in a place to create, but I am in a place where I need to just sort of fill myself up, if that makes sense. Because, constantly having creative input is also like really draining and can be really exhausting. So like sometimes I'll have periods where I feel so creative and so energized and so inspired, and I'll be just like working and creating stuff and making new images and have new ideas and just like all's great. And then all of a sudden I'll have this like crash, or I'll feel like I don't know what to do. I don't have any new ideas. I don't, everything I'm making is bad. And so then I remind myself, like, okay, this is time maybe that I need to sort of like re-energize, rejuvenate, fill up my cup again, find a way to be inspired in order to create again. So it's this constant like sort of filling up and putting things out there. And then, and then again with the highs and lows, like it's going to come and it's going to go. And I feel like talking with other creatives, hearing other creatives, it's sort of comforting to know that many, many people share the same experience. That this is just, part of the game is to working through something, sort of walking through the forest, collecting things, like fighting the fear or the hard stuff in order to get to the other side with a work that you're really happy with. And I almost feel like the struggle helps you work things out and come ultimately, hopefully, to a better result.
Let's talk about, I want to talk about your process in creating a book, but let's do it while we talk about Spectacular Sisters, Amazing Stories of Sisters from Around the World, which released here November 9th, 2021. Head to your preferred bookseller, esteemed audience, get your copy as we're talking. Per my promise earlier, I will never describe your book to you. So what does esteemed audience need to know about Spectacular Sisters?
Yeah, thank you. So Spectacular Sisters is a nonfiction collection of stories about sisters from around the world. from history, but also contemporary sisters as well. So it has, I believe, 42 stories about sisters. Some are mostly are sister pairs, but some of them are groups of 3 or more sisters. And of some sort of, notable story. So either one of them is famous, or they did some like really cool thing together, some accomplishment. And some are like really famous. Like I have the, let's see, I have the Obama sisters in there. I have the Kardashian sisters in there as per my editor's request. But I also have some like, lesser known names or sisters that people might have never heard about, that I thought their story was interesting. So yeah, it's all about the sisters. And I tried to, in each case, of course, it's about their lives, but also talk about their relationship, and if there was any like, some juicy details about their story.
And you yourself have got 2 brothers and 2 sisters and are raising 3 daughters. Do I have the math right on all that?
Yes, correct.
You've got plenty of experience with sisterhood.
Yes, and yes, being a sister and having sisters and being a mom of 3 sisters, is just a really big part of my life. And I have always been fascinated by this relationship of being a sister. It's such a fascinatingly complex relationship between girls or women, having this sort of person who's so close, and could be in many ways so similar to you and shares like so many memories. Obviously parents, growing up together in some cases, but is also often very, very different and has a whole different life later. And so, yeah, it just creates this really special bond and friendship, but also potentially rivalry or competitiveness. So yeah, like all the feelings, and of course these all are just in any deep relationship, if it's a spouse or romantic partner or just a close friend. But I feel like, yeah, sisterhood, yeah, is very powerful. And so it was interesting for me to read and research stories about sisters from all over, from different cultures, from different moments in history, and see, how their relationships worked or did not work in some cases, and or if they did anything together, or sometimes, if it's a story of like a very famous woman, it was sort of interesting to read about her lesser known sister, right? And how her sister fared, like, in either in the shadow of her famous sister or alongside her, or yeah. So all of those were super interesting to me, to explore and research and illustrate.
So a project like this is obviously in your wheelhouse. Do you come to your agent, your publisher, and say, hey, I've got a great idea for a book? Do they come to you and say, hey, we want to do a book, some combination thereof? How's the ball get rolling?
So usually in most cases, it's me who has an idea. And so I usually, like, it will start with an idea and I'll run it with my agent first, just sort of an idea, like throw it at her and say like, hey, do you think this could potentially be something? And then she'll, we'll talk about it and she'll either say, yeah, I love it, or, this has been done before, or, we'll just talk about things. And then if she thinks it's a great idea, then it's just really, I put together some sort of like basic proposal, which usually, I mean, again, it depends on the project. With Sisters, what I did is I created some sample chapters with text and illustrations and everything, as well as a complete table of contents of what I vision a book like this can be. I don't remember, but I might have included an introduction too. And so then I put together like a whole proposal like this. I polish it with my agent, and then she submits it to the publishers. With Sisters, I actually first discussed the idea. Well, the original idea happened like way back when I was doing my MFA. Actually, I had the seed of the idea there. I knew that I wanted to do a project about sisters, and I didn't know what form it was going to take. I didn't know if it was going to be fiction, nonfiction. At first, I thought maybe I'd just like interview just like random sisters that I meet. Or maybe it's just going to be fictionalized stories about sisters. I wasn't sure. And I was playing with all kinds of ideas. And then at some point, I did have a discussion with an editor, a children's book editor, who said she'd love to see a collection of stories about fiction, nonfiction, a nonfiction collection of stories. So I think this came up when I floated with her, like just like different thoughts that I had about the books. This editor ultimately could not acquire the book for different reasons, but I still had made the whole proposal. And so I was delighted that it found a home with a different publisher. So it was it was a really long process, like the whole story of Sisters, like from, an idea in 2016 to being acquired. I think it was acquired in 2018 or 2019 until coming out now in 2021. So yeah, it's been a long time in the making.
So lots more of those highs and lows we were talking.
Yeah, for sure. Every book is a journey.
So when you start, you mentioned you had your own table of contents. So I'm assuming you've already picked out your ideal pairings of sisters, and then your editor comes and says, don't think we're not putting the Kardashians in there, because we definitely are. Or how do you go about deciding what sisters that you're going to focus on, and then what order they're going to appear in the book?
Yeah, So I did I did a lot of research at first, like just finding sisters I thought were interesting to put in the book, and I compiled a list. But then working with the editor, it was really important for both of us to make sure the list is inclusive and diverse. So like not just have, white sisters in there, or only American sisters in there, or like, a certain type of profession kind of sisters in there. I really wanted to have like a broad range of different kinds of sisters, and make sure, that it's inclusive. And then for example, at like the last possible minute to edit, like it was right before the elections of 2020, and I said, like, how cool would it be to include Kamala Harris and her sister Maya in the book? And so that was like a very, very final edit. We were able to squeeze them in. So they made it, for example. So it was like the table of contents was a dynamic for sure. But we did. And so even after I wrote most of the entries, we were still like making some tweaks to that, and like making like final entries at the last minute.
And then were there sisters that ended up on the cutting room floor?
Yes, they were definitely sisters that were edited out. Yes. And that there was, for example, there were a pair of sisters of Confederate spies that were cut off. They had a very interesting story, but we decided that they're not going to make the cut. There was another pair of sisters that the sensitivity reader had caught something in their background that was like, they were like from the 1920s, and it seemed a little bit, they were involved in some sort of like racist comment thing. Which I did not pick up on my research. And I am so, so grateful that the sensitivity reader caught that. And so they did not make the cut. So yeah, so we took some of them out. One example though of sisters that my editor wasn't sure about at first was a pair of warrior sisters from like ancient Vietnam that she thought maybe we should cut out because they were warriors. And we decided to leave them in ultimately because it's just an interesting story. And I think that kids can handle it. And it's also like half myth. And so she was persuaded to leave those in. So yeah, so those are some examples.
How terrible if you're the good famous sister that, you know, did everything right, built children's hospitals, and then your other sister is drawing racist comics and, I don't know, killed 7 people or whatever, and now and now you can't make the cut. How frustrating. But I suppose that's the dynamics of sisterhood, right?
Yes, well, yeah, that's we just, not everyone could make the book, and so we made some decisions there. But yeah.
And then with a project like this, where you're drawing, you're writing, you're doing the research, you're wearing every hat there is to do, how do you approach a sister pair, and where do you start? Do you start, I assume, with research? Do you do some illustration? When do you start drawing versus when are you writing? Are you doing it all simultaneously, or how's that work?
Yeah, so for sisters, I think definitely I started with just doing as much research as I can about the sisters, both about like them as a pair, but usually individually as well, because a lot of times, like I said, like there'll be one that's more famous than the other, and it's one that's just harder to find information about. So yeah, like just read everything I can, look at a lot of their images, and then just start writing out sort of like a joint biography about them. So sort of synthesize everything together. And then it was helpful for me to sort of write something out first and then illustrate it, because sometimes after writing up the story, I would get an idea for what I want the illustration to be, right? So once I get like more knowledge and information and like a juicy detail, also I'm like, oh, that would work perfect for the illustration, you know? So or the mood or the tone or like the relationship to inform like what I want the illustrated piece to look like. So yeah, so I kind of wrote up a first draft and then also made sketches, and those all went to the publisher. And then we had several rounds of revisions where I would get edits both for the text and then sometimes like, you know, comments on the sketches. And then I created the final illustrations. I have, if you'll see in the book, though, there's also like every sister pair has both like a full color illustration, but then also like little spots inside. And so I worked on all of those and then just had some like text revisions. And then the cover comes at the end. So after like all the inside is basically done, that goes to like proofreading and the designer, and then I worked on the cover. So yeah, that's the process.
When you're doing a little bit of everything like that, do you ever feel like you're done with the project, or just they tell you, no, it's time, you have to stop, we have to publish this now?
That's such a good question. You know, looking almost every time I look at like one of my previous books, I'm like, oh, I should have done this. I should have changed this. This could be better. I almost never think like that something's finished. Luckily, there are deadlines because otherwise I would just be working on things forever and ever. And so it's good that the publisher is like, nope, it's done, it's ready to go. So that's helpful because at some point, you know, you got to say like it's finished. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's finished. Yeah, there's always more tweaks that can be made for sure.
One trick I found, because you know, if I pick up an older book, then I'm like, oh my god, let me change this real quick. let me just change. I can make it a little bit better. Give me a moment. As I just think, no, that's not my book. That's me from the past book. I remember who I was on the date that was published, and that he wrote that book. And now the new and improved me is here, and he wouldn't write that book, but he's writing this one. And that way, or I'm very impressed. Me from the past did that. I'll never be as good as he was. Somewhere in between helps out, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to give myself some grace and say, you know what? I've learned since I've improved in this and this. And also, like you said, sort of like respect that work for what it is. Like say, you know what? I put a lot of effort into it. Other people did too. And it's its own thing now, right? It's a separate entity from me, and respect is due for the thing that it is. Yeah.
And then I'm curious because I know you've written a lot of biographies, which of course this is a little bit as well. You've done a book for Steve Jobs, for Gloria Steinem, for a number of folks. And when you're writing for a biography for a famous person like that, does that let some of that pressure off that, oh, maybe it's not me, it's just that Steve Jobs, people hate him this year. So that's not me. Or does it also feed into your insecurity? I didn't do a great job. It's because Steve Jobs is so great that everybody wants to read this book.
To a degree. First, I want to say and clarify that the Steve Jobs books I only illustrated. There's a different author. So I just illustrated that book, which I do sometimes. Sometimes I illustrate for other authors. My first picture book biography was about Gloria Steinem, and that I wrote and illustrated. And I have more biographies coming out this year, next year. But yeah, there's something about that. I think sort of saying, well, exactly, like it's their story, it's them, and sometimes they're a figure that not everyone relates to. So yeah, there's some of that. For sure. Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, it's also like a lot of responsibility, right? Like with Gloria Steinem, I definitely felt a lot of responsibility because she's such a well-known, respected figure. And I am making a kid's book about her, I am telling her story. So there's a lot of, yeah, it's also a little bit, sometimes it's even more scary in that regard,
Well, because you're writing for younger readers, I mean, there's a possibility this might be the very first time they're ever encountering Gloria Steinem, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And also that's how I see it. It's sort of like an introduction, like a gateway, right? Into like learning about her and making it accessible and child friendly and but still still meaningful and interesting and yeah, and reflective of like the people of who the person is. So yeah, it's a very cool and interesting challenge to write a biography for kids, for sure. I find it very fun, and if I'm like, and it's only for people that I'm like really inspired by, right? So because I'm like really interested and inspired by a person, then telling their story in a way that's appealing for kids I find it really like a really creative, cool challenge.
There's seemed to be a definite theme to your work. You've done, the 100 Feminist, now Spectacular Sisters, Gloria Steinem. This suggests to me that either you're consistently picking or gravitating toward projects with strong themes of feminism, or that's become your brand and people say, oh, we have a project with themes of strong feminism, let's go contact Dora Lewis?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's a bit of both. I'm definitely making work that I resonate with and feel passionate about. So I'm definitely passionate about feminism and women's stories and issues, and inspiring kids with strong female uh, role models. So absolutely. Um, but I'm also interested in other things. Like I have a book that I made that came out last year called We the People, which is an illustrated um, exploration of the Constitution that I made with a collaborator, Evan Sargent. And so I am interested in other things as well. So in a way, yeah, I mean, if you look at my body of work, it's definitely for now like almost like a branded thing. But um yeah, and I think and I think I'll always be interested in doing work about women and for girls and in all of those facets. But yeah, I'm also interested in other things. So see where I can incorporate that as well. And I'm also trying to do some fiction work. So we'll see how that turns out.
Do you have passion projects that you're still hoping to get to one of these days, like a list that I can slowly cross off each of these things that I want to do?
So how do you mean? Like in addition to books or like?
Yeah, like for example, I always wanted to hit every genre, and I haven't written a romance yet, but I know that if long enough timeline, I'm gonna write one, if for no other reason than I can check off that box that okay, I hit that genre too.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I just mentioned that I'm working on fiction. So far, all of my books that I wrote have been nonfiction, and I would love to get a book of fiction of mine um, out there. So um, it doesn't have to be necessarily like, a novel, but like if it's just like something that I created that's not based on like a biography or something like that. So that's definitely a goal that I have. Yeah, for sure.
So I wanted to talk. I'm watching our time and I see it slipping away. Like, oh, where's it going? But I want to talk a little bit about Mrs. America, because I was so thrilled when I saw the credit sequence that this is very much an Aura Lewis credit sequence. In fact, did I spy the Gloria Steinem cover in there, or am I dreaming that?
So I couldn't use the original Gloria Steinem cover because that is, the publishers. The publisher has the right to that. But the people who created the sequence, so like the studio, is called U and Co, and they are based in LA, and they were hired to make the sequence to the fabulous show Mrs. America, which I think is fantastic. So they actually, I think that it was the director of the show that saw my Gloria book and and loved the vibe of it and like was looking for something in that style of like that sort of invokes like the 70s feel, because it's a very much like a 1970s kind of show. So they reached out to me because of that Gloria cover. So that was just a super cool story. And it's a crazy story, but I was actually in Vietnam at the time when they reached out to me out of the blue to work with them on this title sequence. And so because they really loved the Gloria cover, I created, I did, we created a magazine cover with Gloria, but I created a new, like a little bit older version of Gloria. I mean, not older version, because also the kids book is an older version of Gloria, but maybe a more, like just a one that was more tailored to the credit sequence that they were looking for. So yeah, that was just a really super cool project to work on.
And when you're working on a project like that, is it assumed as you go that at any point the producers could change their mind and say, nope, we've decided that we want to do just big ugly title cards or pictures of the we've got Kate Blanchett, let's put her up front. Was there a sense of, oh, this probably won't be in the show anyway, or at what point were you assured that nope, this is definitely going to be the opening?
Yeah, with things like that, they can get killed at the final moment, like literally. Like you can work on something and then like at the end, the directors and the showrunners will be like, nope, we want just this. So absolutely, the whole time I was working on it, first of all, like I worked on a lot of images that did not make it into the final sequence. Things were constantly being changed, constantly being modified, constantly like changing direction. So until like they said like it's up, it's running, like it was scary. And it was just really, really cool that it all worked out, and I'm the result I think is so fun. So yeah.
Following the social media of previous guest Hugh Howey, and he's literally standing on the set that they've built for his novel Wool, talking to the actress who's going to play Juliet. And he's still tweeting out, "I don't know if the show will ever make it to air," because he just knows that the movie deals have a way of changing and falling apart at the last minute. Did you know that it was going to be the Fifth of Beethoven that they were going to play? So were you listening to that while you were drawing, or did you have no idea what song they were gonna end up choosing?
That song came in like somewhere in the middle. So it wasn't in the beginning, they didn't know what song they were going to use, and then it's sort of like they were playing around with it, and then it just sort of stayed because it worked so well. So yeah, once they knew about that, that was like in the back of my mind, and it's a really fun um rendition of that. Yeah. So
Well, let's see. Our time is it's almost over. I gotta ask.
yeah, as you
I
said,
asked
it
a
was going to fly by.
question. But this has been an absolute blast. I've so enjoyed chatting with you this morning. But esteemed audience knows that I would never end a show without asking, because I ask every guest, or Lewis, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
I wish I did. I never have. But I definitely believe that there are um, things that we can't explain and don't have knowledge to, or might never have knowledge to. Like, um, definitely, if it's in the spiritual realm or otherworldly, or yeah, I think that these things exist, and so I've never seen a ghost or a flying saucer or anything like that, but I do feel like I've lived a past life.
Oh,
For sure. Yeah, I just feel like I've been here before sometimes. So yeah, I don't know a lot, but I definitely yeah. So
I mean, do you have an idea of who you might have been, or is it just elements of deja vu that make you think that, hey, hang on, wait a minute? What is it that gives you
um
suspicion?
yeah, I think it's just I don't have any concrete thing, and again, it's just like a feeling. But it's sometimes a deja vu, or like I'll feel like I have memories of um, distant things and music that all of a sudden is familiar, though I've never heard before. Um, Things like this, of moments when I'm nostalgic for things that I've never experienced. Yeah, so it's just things like that.
Whenever the subject of past lives comes up, because I figure you can't remember who you were necessarily anyway, at least I can't. I always tell people I was William Shakespeare. Why not?
Exactly. Why not?
Maybe, who knows?
Love that.
My last question is always some variation of, if you could go back toward the start of your career, middle of your career, whenever it would have been helpful to you to give yourself some advice that would have made things easier for you, and maybe would make things easier for everybody watching or listening to us now, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Hmm. I think that, and this is nothing new, but I feel like it's always helpful for me to remember that the best work comes when I do something that I deeply care about and that I'm inspired about and excited about, and not to try to like think of like what someone else might want me to do, or like what's being done, or of course like it's good to know what's being done, but to try to like force something to come out because like you think you should or you have to, I think like ultimately those things, it will feel flat. And I think that um just really go in and think like, what do you want to make, what do you want to create, what are you interested in, what is um like fun for you to do, and just, yeah, and that's where the best work comes from that passionate place. And again, this is nothing new, but I just feel like it's so true. um yeah, that is, I think, the most important thing for me. Yeah.
Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so it's easy to find me online. If you just look up my name, Aura Lewis, it's Aura. You'll find my website. You'll find me on Instagram. Also, just with my name. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, but I really am not a huge user of social media. But I think my biggest one is Instagram. So yeah, you can definitely find me there. And my books. My books in online and in bookstores too.
And don't forget to get your copy, esteemed audience, of Spectacular Sisters, which was released here November 9th. You can enjoy it right now. As always, head to middlegradeninja.com for interviews with all of the best people, the editors, the literary agents, the authors you crave, the folks you want to know more about. They're available there. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. And as always, God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.